It was the fall of 865, and a strange silence had settled over the east coast of England. The air was chilly, the sea calm, and the people living near the shore were busy with their daily lives. But little did they know, a scene was unfolding on the horizon that would change their world forever. This wasn't just another day, it was the beginning of a new chapter in history. The atmosphere carried an eerie sense of foreboding, like nature itself had gone quiet before a massive storm. Far out at sea, behind the mist, shapes began to emerge slowly. At first they looked small, but as they drew closer, their true nature became clear. These weren't ordinary boats. They were the famous longships of the Vikings, with fearsome dragon heads carved on their prows. They weren't just ships, they were a declaration of war. There were so many of them that it seemed like the sea itself was coming at you as an enemy. The people aboard these ships were known to the Anglo-Saxons for years, but never like this. In the past, Vikings came in small groups, struck suddenly, looted, and vanished. Their attacks were fast, ruthless, and brief. But this time was different. This time, their intentions weren't temporary, they were permanent. They weren't here just to raid, they were here to settle. For the English, this was a nightmare. They couldn't even grasp the magnitude of the threat. The church scribes who recorded the events of the time gave this army a name that still echoes in history, the Great Heathen Army. That name wasn't just a label for a force. It was fear, destruction, and a sign of an era yet to come. The leadership of this mighty army wasn't in the hands of ordinary men. At its helm was a legendary bloodline, the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar was a name that struck fear and awe, a man whose feats were told and retold in stories. Now his sons stood united, ready to avenge their father's death. This wasn't just an army, it was a mission. Every soldier carried the same fire in their heart, vengeance. Their fight wasn't for money or land, it was about honor and blood debts. There was a ferocity in their eyes that only comes to those who have lost everything and are determined to gain something back. But among them was one figure who stood out from the rest. He wasn't the strongest, nor the greatest fighter. In fact, the opposite was true. His body was weak, a condition that in normal circumstances would have spelled defeat on the battlefield. It said that he wasn't even expected to walk into battle. He couldn't stand on his own feet. He was carried on a shield like a living weapon. His legs were weak, or maybe completely useless. Yet, despite all that, his name alone was enough to strike terror into the hearts of enemies. His name was Ivar the Boneless. Hearing it, people were stunned. Did he really have no bones? Or was it just a metaphor? Some said it was a disease, while others believed it pointed to his mind. A mind that could never be confined, a brain that could think in ways others couldn't. And that's where the story gets interesting. How could a man who couldn't even walk shake an entire kingdom? How could a leader with a weak body command others in battle? This question isn't just about history, it's about the limits of human potential. Ivar proved that wars aren't won with swords alone. The real battles are fought in the mind. Where others saw strength, Ivar saw opportunity. Where others attacked recklessly, he strategized. He looked at the battlefield like a chessboard, every move carefully calculated. York, one of England's most powerful cities at the time, was a fortress. Its walls had stood since Roman times, thought to be unbreachable. Many enemies came, but none could fully conquer it. The city wasn't just a place, it was a hub of power, trade, and politics. But Ivar saw it differently. He didn't see a challenge, he saw an opportunity. He studied its defenses, its weaknesses, and the psychology of its people. He knew that behind every strong wall, there was a weak point, and that would be the key to victory. This story isn't just about a war, it's about a mind. A man who, despite his physical weakness, could defeat some of the most powerful people in the world. He proved that true strength isn't in the body, it's in the mind. And that's the moment where the foundation of a new empire was laid. A Viking empire that would rise in the heart of England. An era that would change the course of history. This wasn't just a victory, it was a revolution. And behind that revolution was a mind that could never be broken. And that was the mind that never broke. But every storm has a spark that sets it in motion. The Viking storm about to hit England didn't just appear out of nowhere. There was a story behind it, a story of pride, poor decisions, and broken systems. To understand why this destruction came, we have to go back to the moment where it all began. 9th century England wasn't anything like the England we know today. It wasn't a united country. It was a patchwork of small kingdoms constantly at war with each other. Every king thought of himself as the strongest, and each kingdom was busy trying to outdo its neighbors. The idea of unity barely existed, and that was their greatest weakness. In the lands we now call England, there were 4 major kingdoms: Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and up north, the powerful Northumbria. Each had its own army, its own politics, and its own problems. But one thing they all had in common: they were more focused on fighting each other than on any outside threat. And that's exactly the environment where danger was brewing. When a nation is divided from within, an external enemy can easily break it apart. England's kings either didn't understand this or they didn't want to. They were so caught up in their petty battles that they completely overlooked the massive storm heading straight for them. Amid all this chaos, one name rose that struck fear and respect in equal measure: Ragnar Lothbrok. He wasn't just a Viking, he was a legend. His stories were told in every corner of Scandinavia. He was a warrior who made the impossible possible. It's said that Ragnar even attacked the city of Paris and forced it to pay him tribute. Kings themselves would pause and think when they heard his name. He wasn't just a raider, he was a leader who knew how to wield fear as a weapon. But every legend has an end. For Ragnar, that end was written on the shores of England. On another raid, fate turned against him. His ship was destroyed, leaving him stranded in enemy territory. On the coast of Northumbria, he was captured. The man that kings feared was now a prisoner. He was brought before King Aella, the ruler of Northumbria at the time. This was the moment where history took a dangerous turn. Aella wasn't your average king. He had seized power through force, overthrowing the previous king, Osbert. His rule was shaky and he needed to prove his strength. Capturing Ragnar was a golden opportunity. He thought that by punishing such a mighty Viking leader severely, he would cement his authority. He wanted to show his people that he was a strong ruler who feared no one. But he didn't consider just how dangerous the consequences of that decision could be. In a ruthless act, Aella ordered Ragnar thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. This wasn't just punishment, it was a message. A warning to enemies and perhaps even to his own people. It was a moment that would set the stage for the coming destruction. Legend says that as the snakes bit him, Ragnar didn't scream. Instead, he did something else. He made a prophecy. He spoke of his sons, calling them little pigs, and said that if they knew the torment he was in, they would howl in outrage. Whether he actually said these words or not is hard to confirm. But the story had a power far greater than truth. Those words became a message, a spark that would soon ignite into a wildfire. Ragnar died, but his voice did not go silent. When the news of his death reached across the North Sea, it wasn't just news, it was a declaration. In the halls of Denmark where his sons sat, the news sparked grief but also rage. A slow-burning anger, cold but deadly, began to take hold. Ragnar's death wasn't just the death of a man, it was a challenge to the entire Viking world. Revenge had to be taken. And that responsibility fell on his sons, Bjorn, Halfdan, Abba, and above all, Ivar. But here's the difference. This wasn't just revenge. For Ivar, it was an opportunity, a chance to break an entire kingdom and create a new world. And to do that, he had to build an army the world had never seen before. And then came the moment when Ivar began turning his intentions into reality. He wasn't just thinking about revenge, he decided to build a force powerful enough to change history. He couldn't just rely on his brothers. He had to unite the entire Viking world. It was no easy task because Vikings were fiercely independent. But in Ivar's mind there was a bigger purpose, one that could bring everyone together. News of Ragnar's death spread across northern Europe. Everywhere it went, it sparked strong emotions, especially among those who considered him a hero. Warriors in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were enraged by the news. Even the Norse Gaels in Ireland answered the call. This was the moment when different tribes began to unite for a single purpose. This unity wasn't under one king, it was under a shared goal. Every warrior joined this campaign of his own will. Their hearts burned with the fire of revenge more than the desire for wealth. And that's exactly what brought them together. Ivar used that emotion to forge a powerful alliance. This was Ivar's first major victory. Without any formal government, he had built a massive army. He brought different tribes under one banner. Where other Viking leaders only knew how to fight, Ivar knew how to unite people. That was his real power. His brothers were famous for bravery on the battlefield. Bjorn was a fearsome fighter, Halfdan a balanced commander, and Ubba an aggressive warrior. But Ivar's strength lay in his mind. He knew how to win battles not just with force but with strategy. He saw war as a game where every move counted. When the army was ready, its sheer size stunned the enemy. English chroniclers recorded it with visible fear in their words. They called it the Myselhenheer, the Great Heathen Army. The name wasn't just a label for a force. It was a symbol of terror. It showed that even the enemy took this power seriously. The English were used to Viking raids. They knew a few ships would arrive, strike, and then leave. These raids were dangerous but temporary. People would get back to their lives within days. But this time was completely different. The Great Heathen Army wasn't just a raiding party. It was a full-scale war machine built to fight for the long term. It wasn't just warriors. It had supplies, resources, and planning. They weren't here to leave. They were here to stay and rule. Historians say the army numbered in the thousands. By the standards of the time, it was an enormous force. It had both naval and land capabilities. It was an army that could go wherever it wanted. That was its greatest strength. The army was like a moving city. It had people, animals, supplies, and war machines. It didn't just fight battles, it could sustain itself. This meant it could stay in enemy territory for a long time, a completely new concept for the Anglo-Saxons. Ivar and his brothers knew old strategies wouldn't work anymore. Simply attacking and retreating wasn't enough. They had to adopt a new kind of warfare. They changed the rules of war. They decided to build winter camps called winter settle. These were strong, fortress-like camps where the army could stay through the harsh winter. This gave them the freedom to fight all year round, a revolutionary step. Now Vikings could strike in any season, not just the summer. They could catch the enemy off guard at any time. The Anglo-Saxon armies weren't prepared for this. They were usually tied to the harvests and couldn't fight year-round. This strategy reflected Ivar's mind. He was patient, calculating, and adaptive. For him, war wasn't just a game of brute force. He planned every move in advance. The army was disciplined and purpose-driven. This wasn't a chaotic mob. Everyone knew their role. It functioned as a complete system. Ivar was the brain of the entire operation. His brothers were the arms and the muscle. They fought on the battlefield while Ivar strategized. It was a perfect balance. Now the little pigs Ragnar had mentioned were no longer just a story. Their power had exploded into a formidable force. Their rage had transformed into an unstoppable army. This wasn't just revenge, it was a revolution. In 865 this great army set sail. But interestingly, they didn't head straight for Northumbria, where their revenge awaited. Instead, they took a different route, a testament to Ivar's intelligence. He knew a direct attack could be risky. He needed to set the conditions in his favor first. He was thinking like a chess player, carefully considering every move. That's why his first target was a quiet and weak kingdom, East Anglia. It was a place from which he could easily make his next move. This was where the real game was about to begin. And Ivar was now fully ready to reshape England according to his will. And truly this was the moment where the real game began. But Ivar didn't act like a typical warrior. He didn't head straight for Northumbria, even though that's where the revenge lay. Instead, he made a decision that seemed strange at first, but in reality, it was proof of his intelligence. He turned his army toward a relatively quiet and weak kingdom, East Anglia. This wasn't just a change of route, it was a shift in the entire direction of the war. It was the first clear sign that this wasn't just another Viking raid. If it were merely about revenge, they would have struck directly at the enemy's heart. But Ivar was thinking beyond revenge. He didn't just want to win a battle, he wanted to topple a kingdom. And to do that, patience and strategy mattered more than haste. When they arrived in East Anglia at the end of 865, The people expected destruction to begin immediately. Usually Vikings would arrive, set fires, loot, and slaughter. But this time nothing like that happened. Instead they set up a strong camp and stayed put. That silence itself was a dangerous signal. This patience was Ivar's greatest strength. He knew that not every war is won with a sword. Sometimes, waiting is the most powerful weapon. He gave his enemy time, but really, that time was being used to his own advantage. For King Edmund of East Anglia, this was a difficult situation. A massive army stood before him, and he had neither the strength nor the resources to fight directly. He knew that if he went to battle, his kingdom could be destroyed. His only option was negotiation, and that was exactly what Ivar wanted. He wasn't seeking battle, he wanted a deal. But this wasn't an ordinary deal where only gold or silver was exchanged. This time, his demand was something else. Something that seemed small but could change the course of the entire war. He asked for horses. It may sound like a simple request, but this move changed everything. Edmund gave the horses in exchange for peace, probably thinking it would end the problem. But in reality, he had given Ivar something that would make him nearly unstoppable. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle clearly states that the army was now horsed. This meant that the Vikings now had a large number of horses. Such a step had rarely been seen in Viking campaigns before. And this is what made them different from every other army. Until now, the Vikings had been kings of the sea. They arrived by ships, raided, and then retreated. Their power was limited to water. But now, they could move quickly on land as well. With the horses, the great heathen army transformed into something new. They were no longer just raiders, they had become a fully mobile army. They were no longer confined to the coast. They could move deep into the country. This advantage was nearly impossible for England to counter. Anglo-Saxon armies usually moved slowly. They were made up of farmers who only marched for battle at specific times. But Ivar's army could now move at any time. They could travel fast and strike anywhere unexpectedly. This speed became their true weapon. Where the enemy couldn't even think, the Vikings would arrive. They didn't stay in one place, they kept moving. The constant pressure kept the enemy off balance. During the winter of 865 to 866, the Vikings stayed in East Anglia. But this wasn't a rest period. They used the time to strengthen themselves and learn about the territory. It was a training period, preparing for the next attacks. They sent scouts, studied the terrain, and analyzed the surrounding kingdoms. All of it was part of a grand strategy. Ivar never acted without a plan. Every step was carefully calculated. Then came the news that made everything easier. Northumbria, the kingdom they wanted to destroy, was already breaking from within. Two kings were fighting each other. This was exactly the weakness Ivar had been waiting for. It was as if the enemy had set a trap for itself. Ivar didn't need to act. Northumbria was weakening on its own. This was a golden opportunity. Ragnar's prophecy was coming true. The old pig was now trapped in its own snare. And the little pigs were stronger than ever before. But now the difference was that they weren't just angry, they were ready. They had an army, a strategy, and now mobility. In every sense they had become powerful. Ivar didn't rush. He waited for the right moment. He knew that a single perfect moment could decide the war. And that moment was approaching. Everything was ready. The army, the plan, the opportunity, everything had aligned. East Anglia was just the beginning. The real target remained. And now, Ivar was about to make his next move, a move that would change the course of England's history. And then the moment Ivar had been waiting for finally arrived. While his army was gaining strength in East Anglia, another story was unfolding in the north. Northumbria, once one of England's most powerful kingdoms, was slowly crumbling from within. This destruction didn't come from the outside, it came from inside. A war among its own people, the most dangerous kind of all. This civil war wasn't just a struggle for power, it was a bitter fight for control. King Aella, the man who had killed Ragnar, wasn't a rightful king. He had seized the throne by force and his actions shook the entire system. Opposing him was the true king, Osbert, whom he had overthrown. This division was what left Northumbria vulnerable. When a kingdom has two powerful leaders fighting each other, the real damage falls on the people and the army. Northumbria's forces were split in two, one loyal to Aella, the other to Osbert. Their strength was halved or even less. But the problem wasn't just the army. Leadership had completely fractured. There was no clear direction, no unified strategy. Everyone was fighting their own battle, unaware that the real threat was coming from outside. This was exactly the kind of situation a clever leader like Ivar could spot instantly. He didn't just see strength, he recognized weakness. He saw Northumbria's internal struggle as a golden opportunity, a chance that might never come again. If Northumbria had been united, it would have been very difficult to conquer. It had a strong army, resources, and experience. But broken from within, it had become easy prey. To Ivar, this was not an enemy, it was an opportunity. Here, Ivar's true genius comes into play. He knew that wars aren't won on the battlefield alone. They are won before they even begin. Understanding the enemy, recognizing their weaknesses, and striking at the perfect moment. That was his strategy. And at the heart of all this, there was one prize more valuable than anything else: Northumbria's capital, Eoforwic. Eoforwic, known today as York, wasn't just a city. It was the center of northern England. Trade flowed through it, decisions were made there, and it was the very soul of the kingdom. The city had been established during Roman times when it was called Eboracum. Its walls were strong and its defenses had stood for centuries. This was a fortress not easily broken. Its location made it even more significant. Positioned on major trade routes and connected to the sea by river, whoever controlled the city could control the entire region. Ivar didn't see the city as just a target. He saw it as a key. He knew that if he took York, Northumbria would fall into his hands almost automatically. This strike could topple the entire system. That's why he chose a major objective instead of small raids. He wasn't just looking to win battles, he wanted to destroy a kingdom. York was the key to that goal. As the winter of 866 began to fade, Ivar made his move. He set his army in motion, marching north. But this wasn't just a march, it was a calculated assault. The army that moved into Northumbria was no longer the same. It was strong, organized, and ready. It had speed, intelligence, and above all, a clear purpose. As they entered Northumbrian lands, no one knew what was coming. The enemy was still preoccupied with their own internal conflict. They had no idea that a massive threat was approaching. It was as if someone was fighting inside their own home, and an outsider suddenly broke in through the door. Northumbria was weak, divided, and oblivious. For Ivar, this was the perfect moment. He neither rushed nor hesitated. He struck when the enemy was at their weakest, a hallmark of a great commander. His objective was now clear: York. He wasn't going for a minor skirmish. He was about to deliver a decisive strike that would change history. And so began a silent but deadly march. An army was advancing that would not only conquer land but alter destiny itself. And York stood directly in the path of this storm. And then the day came that would change everything. Ivar and his army had reached the gates of York, but this was more than just an attack. It was the result of a carefully calculated plan. He had chosen to win the battle not by brute force but through timing. He picked the day when the enemy was at its weakest. This was what set him apart from all others. November 1st, 866. This was no ordinary day. It was All Saints' Day. For the Christians, it was a sacred day of worship. On such days, city leaders, nobles, and even soldiers were usually inside the church. This meant that the city's defenses were weaker than usual. Ivar seized upon this vulnerability. Imagine this. If a city's police and army were all attending a single event, how exposed would the city be? That was York that day. Its finest warriors were unarmed inside the church, not prepared for battle, focused only on prayer. This was the moment Ivar had been waiting for. While the people of York were absorbed in worship, a storm was quietly forming outside. The Vikings took their positions silently, no noise, no rush, only full preparation. That silence itself was a weapon, because when the attack came, no one had time to react. Although the city's Roman-era walls were considered strong, time had left them vulnerable. Many sections were crumbling, and the guards were few since most defenders were inside. The Vikings exploited every weakness. It was like attacking an old fortress that existed in name only. Strike the right place and entry becomes effortless. That is exactly what happened at York. The Vikings either found weak points in the walls or overcame the small number of guards and slipped inside. The result was astonishing. A city once thought impregnable fell within hours. There was no prolonged siege, no drawn-out battle. It was a swift, sudden, and complete conquest. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle even describes it plainly, stating simply that the army went to York and captured it. The simplicity of the account reflects the lack of real resistance. The city had almost fallen without a fight. Imagine it, one of England's most powerful cities, gone in a single day. This was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological shock. Fear spread. If York could fall so easily, no city was safe. But there was another critical factor in this story. The two men who could have defended the city, Aella and Osbert, were not there. They were still embroiled in their personal conflict. This fatal error sealed everything. It was as if a country's two greatest leaders were fighting among themselves, and the enemy took the capital in their absence. If they had been united, York might have survived. But their egos and rivalry blinded them, and Ivar exploited that weakness. Now the situation had changed. The Vikings held the heart of Northumbria. But the war was far from over. The real game had just begun. Ivar knew that Aella and Osbert would not remain idle. They would return to reclaim their honor and their city. And that was exactly what he had been waiting for. He had taken the city, now he would wait for the enemy to come to him. It was like setting a trap. Like a hunter lures prey into the perfect snare. York was the bait. And Aella and Osbert were about to walk right into it. The news of York's fall shook the two kings. They put aside their personal feud. For the first time they were united. But perhaps the decision had come too late. In the spring of 867, they marched toward York with their combined forces. They now had one purpose, to reclaim their city. But they did not know they were walking into a prepared battlefield. A battlefield carefully chosen by Ivar himself. Ivar had not only taken the city, but he also controlled the battlefield. He knew where the enemy would come from, how they would advance, and when. Every move was part of his plan. This is the mark of a genius strategist. Now both kings were approaching. But it was not on their terms, it was on Ivar's. They were going to fight exactly where he was ready. And that was his greatest advantage. Here lies a crucial lesson. War is not won by strength alone, but by timing and planning. Ivar had chosen not only the right moment but also the right place. And that was what made him nearly invincible. Now everything was set. The enemy was approaching. The city was under his control. And a trap had been laid so perfect that escape would be nearly impossible. The next phase was about to begin. A phase that would decide the future of Northumbria. And this was the moment that would decide the fate of England. But before we dive in, a small pause. Because Ivar's story was not just about swords, it was about the mind. His mind was his greatest weapon, a weapon capable of winning any battle. He had turned his physical weakness into strength. And that was why every step he took was deliberate, every move calculated. Just like a strong army needs a solid foundation, telling stories like this requires a strong platform. If you're enjoying this story, now is the time to become part of this journey. One subscribe gives this channel the power to bring you more historical stories. Because this is not just a video, it's an attempt to bring the past alive. Now back to the war where everything was on the line. In the spring of 867, Northumbria's united army reached the gates of York. This was the same army that had been fighting among themselves just months before. Now Aella and Osbert were together and they had a large number of soldiers. They believed their combined strength would crush the Vikings. And at first it seemed they might succeed. They attacked with full force. They struck the city walls hard and in a short time managed to breach them. It was a fierce, aggressive beginning. Northumbrian soldiers were retreating down their own streets. For a moment, it seemed victory was within their grasp. Think of it this way. When an army enters the enemy's fortress, it's often assumed the battle is won, because the defense is broken. But there was a difference here. This was no ordinary battle. This was a trap. Ivar had planned this all in advance. He had not spent the winter idle. He had transformed York into a deadly maze. Every street, every corner, every twist was part of his strategy. The city itself had become a weapon. The Northumbrian army didn't realize one thing: urban warfare. They were used to fighting in open fields where they could deploy their full strength. But inside a city, space is tight, chaos is high. And that was Ivar's advantage. York streets were narrow and complex. When the large army entered, they began to scatter. Their shield wall, their greatest strength, collapsed. Soldiers became isolated, coordination was lost. This was the moment their strength turned into weakness. It was like trying to drive a massive war machine through a narrow alley. Its power and speed become useless. The same goes for thousands of soldiers. If they cannot fight as a unit, they are powerless. Ivar understood this, and he exploited it. This was pure strategy. Now the Vikings unleashed their true assault. They were ready, hidden, and waiting for the right moment. As soon as the enemy scattered, they struck. From every street, every gate, every corner. It was a coordinated ambush. The Vikings were masters of close combat. Accustomed to fighting on ships where space was tight, they could unleash full power in confined areas. This skill gave them superiority over the Northumbrians. Every strike was lethal. The situation was now completely reversed. The attackers had become the hunted. They were surrounded from all sides. No path forward, no way back. This was a complete trap. The battle was no longer a fight. It had become a slaughter. The Northumbrian army was being wiped out, one by one. Every street was a battlefield, every corner an ambush. They were trapped in their own land. Escape was impossible. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes it as an immense slaughter. Words that convey the sheer intensity of what occurred. This was not just defeat, it was total annihilation. An entire army destroyed. This was Ivar's greatest victory. He had forced the enemy into his terms and defeated them. He had turned the city itself into a weapon. He had shown that battles are not won by numbers alone, but by strategy. It was a tactical masterclass. Ivar used everything to his advantage: the land, the timing, the enemy's weaknesses. Perfect execution. As if someone had written it all in advance. Here is the lesson. A larger army is not always a guarantee of victory. If the leader is weak, even the strongest force can fail. And if the leader is a genius, even a smaller army can triumph. Ivar was the perfect example. This battle proved Ivar not just as a warrior but as a strategist. He didn't just fight battles, he designed them. He forced his enemies to fight on his terms. That was real power. Northumbria was now almost destroyed. Its army shattered, its leaders in peril. York was completely in Viking hands. This was not just the capture of a city. It was the beginning of a kingdom's fall. And thus, Ivar the Boneless accomplished what no one thought possible. A leader who could not even walk had defeated a powerful kingdom. This was not merely a victory of war, it was a victory of intelligence. And this was the moment history took a new turn. And then came the moment when everything ended. The streets of York, once a battlefield, were now soaked in blood. Corpses lay scattered, wounded soldiers moaned, and a haunting silence of defeat filled the air. This was not just the end of a battle, it was the end of an entire leadership. Northumbria had become, practically, a headless body. Amidst this blood-soaked chaos, the two kings, Aella and Osbert, were killed. The very two men whose rivalry had weakened the kingdom. And now they fell in the same battle in the same place to the same fate. It was a bitter, strange twist of history. Those who started the fight were the ones who ended it with their deaths. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records it simply: both kings were slain there. But behind this simplicity lies immense devastation. It was not just the death of two men, it was the annihilation of an entire leadership. With it, Northumbria's resistance came to an end. Imagine this. If a country loses both its leaders at the same time, what happens? The army falls apart, the people panic, and the system collapses. Exactly what happened in Northumbria. A complete breakdown. But the story doesn't end here. The Norse sagas tell this event differently, in a far more terrifying, dramatic way. This is where history crosses into legend. According to the sagas, King Aella was not killed immediately. He was captured alive, brought before Ivar and his brothers. This was the moment they had been waiting for years. The moment to avenge their father, Ragnar. It is said that they subjected Aella to a horrifying punishment, the blood eagle. A concept so terrifying it chills the listener. The victim's ribs were severed and splayed out, a ritualistic execution. It was more than punishment, it was a message. But here's an important point. Many modern historians believe the blood eagle may be a legend or exaggeration. It may never have actually happened. Yet whether true or not, its impact was real. People believed it, and that belief carried its own power. And this was the true power: fear. When your enemies tremble at your name before battle even begins, half the war is already won. Ivar and his brothers did exactly that. They turned their names into legends, names that sent shivers through anyone who heard them. It's much like a modern example, a gang or army so feared that opponents hesitate before even confronting them. Psychological warfare. And the Vikings were masters of it. They didn't just win battles, they conquered minds. That was their real advantage. Aella's death sent a clear message. The revenge was complete. Ragnar's sons had settled the score. But this was not merely the end of revenge, it was the start of something new. Northumbria was now leaderless, its army destroyed. In such circumstances, a conqueror would usually take direct control. But Ivar chose a different path. Instead of ruling outright, he applied strategy, and that was proof of his genius. He installed a local Egbert as king, a puppet ruler. The real power remained with Ivar and his army. But to the outside world, it appeared that local governance continued. A clever political move. It was as if a great power placed its chosen leader in a foreign land. The leader managed taxes, enforced law, ran the system, but the true decisions were made elsewhere. Ivar had done exactly that. He gained control without resistance. The benefit? The people did not immediately revolt. They believed their own king remained. But in reality, everything was under Viking control. Silent, invisible control, the most dangerous kind. Now Northumbria was completely broken. Its army, its kings, its system, gone. This was not merely a lost battle, it was the fall of a kingdom. And with it, the path was clear for the Vikings. They were no longer just invaders, they were rulers. Ivar's revenge was complete, but his ambition went beyond that. He sought not only destruction, but creation. A new world where the Vikings ruled. And York would be the center of it all. Here's an important lesson. A great leader does not only win battles, but knows what to do after the battle. Ivar could have looted and left, but he built a system. That's what set him apart. This was the moment when the Vikings' identity transformed. No longer just raiders, they became rulers. They created a new political reality, and the history of England would never be the same. Thus, the battle in the streets of York was more than a conflict. It was a turning point, a moment that ended one kingdom and gave birth to another. And behind it all was a mind that never lost. After winning the war and placing the puppet king Egbert on the throne, the Vikings began their real work, transforming the city. Eoforwic, an ancient Anglo-Saxon city, became Jorvik. This wasn't just a change of name, it marked the dawn of a new era. The transformation signaled that a new government now ruled, under a new language and a new culture. It was the moment when Viking power became clear and permanent in England. Under Norse control, Jorvik quickly flourished. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were intelligent city builders and skilled traders. They used York's location along the River Ouse as a strategic advantage. The river connected them to the North Sea and, through it, to Viking trading networks stretching from Dublin to Kiev. Jorvik was becoming not just a political center, but an economic hub as well. Archaeological discoveries today reveal that Jorvik was a bustling, vibrant city. The streets were redesigned, timber buildings rose in Norse style, and artifacts show a mix of local and foreign cultures. Residents didn't just use locally made goods. They imported luxury items from faraway lands, like silk from the Byzantine Empire and cowrie shells from the Red Sea. It had become an international trade center. The Vikings did more than rebuild the city physically, they established their own governance and legal system. The city operated under a stable political and economic structure. They minted their own coins, a clear sign of power and economic stability. These coins circulated in markets, showing everyone that the Norse rule was real and enduring. It was more than conquest. It was the birth of a civilization. Jorvik became a multicultural hub. Although the ruling class was Norse, the majority of the population remained Anglo-Saxon. This cultural fusion created a unique identity in language, trade, and daily life. Even today, place names in Yorkshire and local dialects show the influence of Old Norse. The Vikings had not only conquered, they had left a lasting cultural impact. Ivar and his brothers did not merely capture a city, they created a thriving capital. The establishment of Jorvik shows that Viking ambitions went far beyond loot and pillage. They came for permanent power. The city's economic growth and governance structure prove that the Vikings were strategic thinkers and planners. It demonstrates how warfare and political intelligence together can lay the foundation for an empire. The story of Jorvik carries a major lesson. After conquest, governance is the key to lasting success. Defeating your enemy is not enough. If a city is not properly managed, it can collapse. Ivar and his team understood this and acted accordingly. Their method aligns with principles of modern empire building, a remarkable example of foresight beyond the battlefield. Jorvik's rise was not limited to the local population. It became part of a major trade network, connecting the city to distant markets and ensuring economic stability. This was a perfect combination of urban planning and commerce, showing that the Vikings were not just fighters, they were entrepreneurs. Cultural integration in Jorvik was equally remarkable. The Norse rulers and Anglo-Saxon population developed a practical coexistence. The city became a microcosm, where two cultures interacted and learned from each other. Artifacts and the city layout still provide proof today. This is a clear example of how social harmony can be maintained after conquest. Ultimately, the establishment of Jorvik shows that Ivar's genius was not limited to military strategy. He calculated long-term governance, urban development, and cultural integration. For the 9th century, this planning was extraordinary. Jorvik became a symbol that the Vikings were here to stay. It stands as proof that strategy is not only about the battlefield, it shapes entire civilizations. The fall of York and the rise of Jorvik was the pivotal moment of the invasion. It became the anchor on which all subsequent campaigns were built. The conquest of Northumbria gave the great heathen army a permanent base from which they could launch further attacks. Ivar and his brothers did not waste this opportunity. The city had become more than a symbolic victory, it was now a practical and tactical center of power. In the following years, the Viking army moved south, capturing Nottingham in the Kingdom of Mercia. This city was strategically located in the heart of the Midlands. Later, in 869, they returned to East Anglia, defeated King Edmund, and killed him. Edmund would later be remembered as a martyr. These campaigns show that the Vikings' actions were not random raids but calculated conquests. The conquest of York redrew the map of England. The country was effectively split. The north and east fell under Viking control, while the southern Anglo-Saxon kingdoms remained independent. The Viking territories became known as the Danelaw, where Norse law and customs were enforced. Jorvik emerged as the undisputed capital of the Danelaw. It was clear that the Vikings were not creating temporary control, they were planning for long-term governance. Within the Danelaw, fortified towns such as Leicester, Lincoln, and Nottingham became integral to Viking authority. These settlements formed the backbone of Viking power, providing strategic points for trade, military presence, and administration. Their existence helped the Vikings establish lasting authority, a structure that would endure for generations and preserve their legacy. The shockwave of York's fall changed the course of English history. It shattered the old Anglo-Saxon power structure and created a new existential threat for the remaining southern kingdoms, particularly Wessex, which would later play a central role under Alfred the Great in unifying England. Ivar's victory was not just a temporary gain in the north, it had national consequences. The invasion forced the Anglo-Saxons to adapt and innovate. A powerful enemy taught them the need for unity. Ivar and his brothers' military success placed continuous pressure on the southern kingdoms, shaping the strategic planning and consolidation of future Wessex kings. York's conquest became a cornerstone in England's political evolution. Put simply, without the fall of York, the Danelaw would not have existed. Without the Danelaw, the southern Anglo-Saxon kingdoms would not have faced an immediate need to unite. Ivor's tactical victory created a historical necessity for centralized authority in England. It was a violent and strategic crucible in which the foundations of modern England were forged. This shows how a single military event can shape centuries of history. Ivor's impact went far beyond the battlefield. The fall of York transformed the political, economic, and cultural landscape of northern England. The Danelaw left a lasting Norse legacy in law, trade, and settlement patterns. Conquest, in this sense, was not merely about defeating an enemy, it was about systematic control and civilization building. Even today, elements of this legacy are visible in Yorkshire, through Old Norse place names and dialects. This period demonstrates the power of strategic thinking, patience, and long-term vision. Ivar turned a personal quest for revenge into a transformation of historical significance. The conquest of York and the establishment of the Danelaw shaped political structures and national identity for generations to come. From a documentary perspective, it is a clear example of how leadership and intellect can extend influence far beyond the battlefield. Ivor's strategy created not just temporary victories, but centuries of historical consequences. Ultimately, the fall of York and the rise of Jorvik laid a strong foundation for the Viking Empire in England. This conquest became a catalyst for political unification, cultural fusion, and economic prosperity. The success of Ivar and the Great Heathen Army reshaped England under a new geopolitical reality. It stands as a historical turning point, a testament to how even a small act of revenge can transform into monumental outcomes for generations. The story of York's fall is at its core the story of Ivar the Boneless. A paradox unfolds. A man physically weak, yet responsible for one of the greatest strategic victories of his time. He was called Boneless, a name that suggested frailty. Perhaps it reflected a medical condition, or maybe it was a metaphor for his cunning, snake-like mind. According to the sagas, he could not stand on his own and was carried on a shield during battles. Behind this apparent weakness lay an unbreakable intellect. Where other warriors saw only the shield wall before them, Ivar saw the entire chessboard. He identified cracks in rival kingdoms and exploited them in his strategy. He understood the power of logistics, transforming a sea force into a mobile land army. It stands as a brilliant example of how planning and foresight can surpass sheer strength on the battlefield. Ivar also demonstrated perfect timing in the attack on York. He struck on All Saints' Day, when the city's leaders and warriors were absorbed in prayer. The surprise attack instantly neutralized enemy defenses. He turned the city streets into a death trap, eliminating the enemy's numerical advantage. This tactic highlights the critical role of patience, anticipation, and timing in military strategy. The conquest of York was not merely a victory, it laid the foundation of a Viking capital. Iorvik became Jorvik, which remained a stable Norse stronghold in northern England for nearly a century. This is historical proof that brainpower can be more powerful than brute force. Ivar captured the city not with physical strength, but with strategic brilliance, an outstanding case study of how intellect shapes history. Yet the story did not end with Ivar's triumph. The fall of the North ignited resistance in the southern kingdoms, particularly in Wessex. The young king Alfred, later known as Alfred the Great, was forged in the fires of this Viking invasion. This struggle laid the groundwork for an epic conflict between the sons of Ragnar and the House of Wessex. Ivar's victory permanently reshaped England's destiny. The conquest of York and the establishment of Jorvik left lasting political, cultural, and economic impacts. The formation of the Danelaw, the implementation of Norse law, trade networks, and governance all trace back to this moment. Viking settlements permanently altered regional politics and forced the Anglo-Saxons to innovate and adapt. Ivar's mind laid the foundation of an empire stronger than any brute force could achieve. This historical analysis teaches the immense value of intellectual leadership over physical prowess. From a documentary perspective, York's fall demonstrates how small tactical decisions can produce long-term consequences. The timing on All Saints' Day, the strategic use of urban terrain, and the exploitation of Northumbria's political chaos shaped centuries of history. Ivor's story is a lesson in converting personal weakness into strength. He showed that leadership, cunning, and intellect could overcome the limits of the human body. Ultimately, the conquest of York permanently transformed England's political landscape. Ivar and the Great Heathen Army achieved not just victory, but also set a precedent for governance and empire building. Their triumphs taught the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms the necessity of unity. It demonstrates that historical outcomes often depend less on the battlefield than on planning, timing, and strategic foresight. As a crippled conqueror, Ivar the Boneless reshaped the course of English history, and this narrative captures the depth of his brilliance.